Hey y'all, Dixie here. Today I want to talk to you about more of the dumb mistakes I've made while backpacking. I have made several videos like this in the past. I'm not a perfect person, so if you want to see the other videos on this topic, you can check the video description for a list of other ones. I like doing these videos not because I enjoy pointing out my mess-ups, but because I hope that somebody can learn from my mistakes, not the hard way. So let's get started. The first dumb mistake I want to highlight is not taking extra precautions during a norovirus advisory. This is a mistake I made recently during my thru hike of the Arizona Trail. I had seen signs up and notices on the Far Out app when the bubble was going through the Gila Wilderness stretch, and maybe even a little bit before and after, that reportedly folks were getting norovirus just dropping like flies. However, I was way behind the bubble. I had started later. I was hiking much slower, having my mom and Bratcher there and having to move Airbnbs every so many days. So once I saw that other hikers were going between me and the bubble and were getting through without any instances of norovirus, I saw comments of that in the Far Out app. I saw mention of that in the Arizona Trail 2025 page or group. And so I thought, okay, well then I should be good. Wrong. I ended up getting norovirus and going to the hospital to get some fluids to try to retain my breast milk supply. And it was just not fun being laid up for like a week when I was already kind of behind where I wanted to be. Norovirus can live on surfaces for up to several weeks and even out in the elements. You might think, oh, out in the sunlight or in hotter temperatures, or no. It can live outside on surfaces. It can also be transmitted through water and food. So some of the things that I should have done as a thru hiker to help protect myself is, one, chemically treat my water. I could have done this with Aqua Mirror drops, or in a pinch, if I didn't have time to order Aqua Mirror drops and there was no outfitter where I could find any, then you can use bleach. So by treating my water and making sure that there's no alive norovirus in it while I'm drinking it would have been smart. Instead, I just used my Sawyer Squeeze, which does not filter viruses. It's good to treat for or filter for bacteria, protozoa, not viruses. I also should have had gloves for touching things like the gates that are frequent out there, the water caches that are necessary to use, or at least for me they were. So touching any of those surfaces can be where you could pick up norovirus. And then also I should have had some soap and water, and at least that at a minimum if I didn't have several sets of disposable gloves. But just being able to wash my hands with soap and water after I handle all of that stuff, because norovirus is not killed by hand sanitizer. The only time I've ever had to say this, but I admit I was wrong. It's raining. The next dumb mistake I want to talk about is not bringing rain gear on a stretch of trail or checking the weather. This is something I preach about all the time. Always check the weather when you're going out. Always, be prepared for the rain, and you should be. So my husband came to visit me for the Grand Canyon section of the Arizona Trail, but we had a couple of days to spare ahead of time, so he decided to do a 20-mile stretch with me, just a single overnight. And it is warmer in Arizona at this time, although we were at higher elevations, and I did not know that we were going to go that high. But anyway, I told him it doesn't rain in Arizona very much. It, hasn't been raining on me a ton. I think we'll be fine without our rain gear. It wasn't showing rain for Flagstaff, although I should know that the rain in Flagstaff and conditions just north of that, where there's kind of more mountainous area, can be very different. I still think we ended up hearing rumbles all day and seeing dark clouds roll over, and had to deal with that feeling of being stressed, not knowing, are we really going to regret not having the rain gear? It all worked out. There was at no point that it rained hard enough that we wished we had our rain gear to put on, but just feeling bad, especially that I put him in that situation. We would have been fine, a bit uncomfortable, but it's just smarter to check the weather and to carry rain gear anyway, just in case. The next mess up I'd like to talk about is not knowing the side effects of a medication I was taking while I went backpacking. I've had acne on and off, but mostly on since I hit puberty. And I especially started getting hormonal acne as I've gotten older, and I was about to get married. It was a few months before, and I was at the dermatologist for actually a cancerous spot above my eye. And as my dermatologist is stitching me up, we were talking about acne, and he's like, yeah, you're about to get married. You know, you could have a clear face for your wedding. I've been telling you about this medication called spironolactone for like a while now. And spironolactone is actually a blood pressure medication, which he did mention to me, but it has an off-label use for acne. He had mentioned he got so much good feedback from people he's recommended it to. And so I said, all right, why not take it? So I started taking it, and in my defense, I took it for a month before I ever went backpacking while on it. And then I went to Idaho to go hike in the wilderness out there. And that's when I ended up having to be rescued off the mountain by a helicopter. One thing to note about spironolactone is it can cause hyperkalemia or high potassium. And I was not aware of that until I was in the moment of already not feeling well, and I was messaging through my inReach with friends and family. The bad thing about that, and finding that out in my mid freak out, is that most of the foods I had brought along were potato based, and that is high in potassium. Also, I had been drinking electrolyte mixes that have potassium and had taken ibuprofen, which can also affect potassium. So once I found out that that could be causing my issue, and then I had ingested all of this potassium, it was a little scary because high potassium can kill you. Or I could have had low blood pressure, which can make you pass out. So it just was not a good situation to be in, not knowing this ahead of time. At a minimum, I could have adjusted my food selection if I had known. What was really scary was being up on the mountain and having these palpitations and arrhythmias in my heart, and my watch telling me that my heart seemed to potentially be an AFib, not knowing if some of that could be due to the medication because I didn't make myself familiar with the side effects and just blindly trusted my doctor and took it. It was good that I at least found out when I did, because I was able to tell the medics when they started some fluids on me that I did not need electrolytes that have potassium. So they were able to give me just saline, just fluids without potassium. I just think it's smart to know what the side effects are of a medication that you're taking, especially if you're going to be out in the wilderness with no service and potentially need to call for help. And if I had known the potential side effects, I may not have ever taken the medication or may not have gone on that backpacking trip, etc. But I at least could have made more informed decisions instead of just blindly trusting my doctor. The next mistake I want to talk about is judging a trail based solely on the Topo Map. This one has messed me up a few times. One example is when I was doing the West Highland Way with my husband in Scotland while 6 months pregnant, and I knew we were going to be doing the Loch Lomond section, which is a lake. And I thought, well, how bad can the terrain be by a lake? I mean, I looked on the elevation profile and I saw that there were some ups and downs and things, but there was no extreme elevation change. And so I thought, oh, we're going to have a lovely stroll by a lake today. Wrong. It was up and down over rocks and roots, and it was a pretty long day for mileage too. The way that we had planned our trip, because I was 6 months pregnant and didn't want to carry my full load in my pack, we decided to stay at little inns along the way. So we had to get to a certain spot by a certain time, especially if we wanted to get food before the restaurants closed. And anyway, it was a whole mess, but we had to do that stretch, even though it was way more difficult than we had anticipated that day. And so anyway, it bit us in the butt. Another trail that I can think of that got me recently is the Arizona Trail. There was a section that I specifically remember like, oh, right, it's, pretty good downhill into Lake Roosevelt area. And while it looked steep-ish, it seemed like, all right, I can just knock this out. Yeah, it might be a little rocky or whatever. Oh my gosh, the loose gravel on this dirt road. And I had seen that it was a dirt road, so I was excited because I'm like, hey, I can move faster on a dirt road. It was horrible. Me and actually this girl that I ran into, we kept falling. We kept slipping down on the road. And anyway, that was just a terrible spot. It took way longer than either one of us anticipated. On the Appalachian Trail, the White Mountains and the 100-Mile Wilderness will get you like this. The White Mountains, by the time you get there, if you're a northbound hiker, you've got strong trail legs and you're like, man, I'm going to kill this section. And then there are all these boulders that you have to get up over, and most people will tell you your mileage expectation should be cut in half by the time you get there. But the elevation changes might not seem so extreme. It's just navigating these huge boulders. In the 100-Mile Wilderness, on the Topo Map, a lot of that looks pretty flat, but it's just rooty and rugged terrain that slows you down more than you would anticipate looking at the elevation profile. And then on the PCT and the CDT, I don't know how many sections that I was like, man, I'm gonna cruise through here. And then there were like all these blowdowns. So you've got an obstacle course, and it takes a lot of time to get up and over a tree with a heavy pack. So anyway, this isn't so bad when you can just camp wherever, whenever you want to, but when you have somewhere you have to be at a certain time, or you've got to make a certain mileage in that day to get to a water source or whatever, it can just make things really stressful and aggravating. You can look ahead at some of the waypoints in the Far Out app, or maybe comments on Facebook groups or something like that to get an idea. But a lot of times you're not like checking every single waypoint along the way. But I guess if you have to be somewhere by a certain time, I would recommend reading those waypoints. I do wish, and this is my proposed solution, there was a way to indicate tread on apps like Far Out, navigational apps, especially Far Out for these long trails. I don't know if the trail color would change, like to a green if the tread is easy, and a yellow if it was, moderate, and red for difficult. I don't know. I don't know how that would be indicated, but it would be really nice if something like that did exist, just so you could have a better full-on picture of what the trail is actually like. The last mistake I want to tell on myself for today is slack packing without a shelter or a headlamp. One time that I guess first comes to mind that messed me up was when I was on the Continental Divide Trail, and Aaron and I had met up with some patrons. They were awesome. They got us some pizza, and then we were able to slack pack, and they were going to meet us later in the day at a spot. They were in their camper van. And so anyway, they were going to meet us at a dirt road, and we would camp there. They would be in their van, and, we could hang out a little bit. Well, it was nice to get the pizza and the opportunity to slack pack, especially because we were going up and over a pretty high point. We got up and above tree line, and there was this storm that was rolling in, kind of weighed out some of the storm, and we're already pretty exposed. It's several miles back down to tree line. If we keep going, it's several miles to tree line, but we're kind of in this midpoint where it's like we could just hurry up and get over. And so we try to do that. We get to tree line. It just ended up being a lot longer of a day than probably what we would have experienced otherwise, because after we got through the storm and we got to tree line, we probably would have just decided to set up there and, figure it out in the morning. But because we had slack packed and our gear was with the patrons down at this dirt road, we had to just keep pushing on, and it ended up being a lot later than we wanted it to be by the time we got there because of getting held up with the storm and all that. So it was a hard lesson learned that if you make the decision to backpack without all of your gear, you could pay for that. And obviously the headlamp thing, there have just been some times where I've slack packed, and like this time, it took me longer than what I expected. So I always make sure that I have my headlamp with me now, even if I think I'll get done well before dark. All right, y'all. Well, that is all I have for you today on my continuation of my dumbest backpacking mistakes. Do you have any mistakes that you're not so proud of that you'd like to share, that you figured out something the hard way while you were backpacking? Drop that in the comments below, because it can always help other people to see like what not to do without, like I said before, having to learn that and experience it the hard way. Thank y'all so much for watching. If you found this video useful, don't forget to share it with a friend, and we will see y'all next time.